Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am joined tonight by Hari Seldon.
Good evening.
And also by Jeffro Johnson, author of Appendix N, A Literary History of Dungeons and Dragons.
Hello, hello.
And we are getting together tonight I will also have a link to Jeffro's gaming blog in the comments of this if you want to go check that out. We are getting together tonight to talk about a John Bellairs novel, one of the authors listed on Appendix N, The House with the Clock in Its Walls. I don't have my own copy, but I got one from the library. Regrettably, mine looks like this. Didn't really need to have Jack Black on there. I don't know. Maybe the movie adaptation is actually pretty good. I haven't seen it, but I
saw it a few years ago, and as I read this, I don't remember anything about the movie being anything like anything I remember from the book. I mean, it's like I don't know if I'm going to go back and ever watch it again, but it's like it feels like they adapted it so hard it became something else.
Sometimes with some adaptations, that's for the best.
Okay, so one more thing before we get to the main discussion about the book, and I did want to mention, if you like my work, you like what I do, you want to help support me and this channel, you can go to subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great and sign up to support me there. Having said that, since, as I said, Jeffro Johnson literally wrote the book on Appendix N, would you like? Well, I guess actually first I should give a short summary of this book and the nature of this book. This is a young adult, I guess a young adult novel is where it would be shelved these days. A 10-year-old, 11-year-old boy is sent to live with his uncle after his parents die in a car accident. And his uncle, as it turns out, is a minor wizard. And his uncle also lives in the house, which had been owned by an evil warlock who somewhere in the house hid some kind of magical clock that they're not sure what it's doing, but they're pretty sure it's nothing good. And Lewis, this young boy, struggles with being in a new town, trying to make friends, and also they have to figure out and diffuse the mystery of this clock in the walls of this this house.
That despite the fact that the TV Tropes page repeatedly calls it the Doomsday Clock, and despite the fact that the story is set in 1948 and the Doomsday Clock was established in 1947, the book does not itself call the clock in the walls the Doomsday Clock at any point.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether that's good or bad, honestly. It would be appropriate for certain reasons, but missed opportunity one way or the other.
Okay. Let's see. I know they use the phrase "the end of the world." I don't know if they ever actually have the phrase "doomsday" in this. I'm not at all sure, to be honest.
No, it's not in there.
No, they do. In chapter 8.
Oh no!
And I don't have page numbers. I'm sorry. On the page were scrawled these words: "Doomsday not come yet. I'll draw it nearer by perspective, or make a clock that shall set all the world on fire upon an instant." So it does use the phrase, but it mostly sticks to the end of the world.
Okay, so I have given a brief prospectus of the book. This is not a, by the way, to anyone watching, this is not intended to be a review in the sense of, do I want to read this? Because there are going to be spoilers all over the place. In fact, we just had one. So if you have not read this, go ahead.
Should we say whether we recommend it, or should we save that for the end?
Go ahead.
I can't. No, you can't recommend this book. This book is like terrible. It's like I mean, like, I enjoyed The Face in the Frost so much. That was like just a marvelous book, enchanting. This thing was a disaster, start to finish.
See, I'm not quite as extreme on Jeffro on this. There were a number of things I liked, and there were at least two large elements of this story that really bugged the heck out of me.
Like the child abuse, the constant child abuse. I'm just shocked. I'm shocked that this was considered a normal book. Like, this was like, not only was it like in libraries and bookstores, kids reading this thing, but it's like, no, let's make a movie about this. What a horrible book! I'm in shock.
By the way, Harry,
folks. All right, no spoilers in that. I will say,
Harry, you might find it interesting to know the last time I had Jeffro Johnson on, he spent the entire time trashing a poem by Lynn Carter about Conan the Barbarian.
Okay. Well, I will say that there were three parts that I very much liked. Unfortunately, one of them was on page 1 and made the rest of it feel sort of downhill from there. I would not go quite as far as Jeffro on whether the book is a disaster. I will say it is pretty short, so if you're on the fence, it would genuinely only take you 2 hours to read it and make up your own mind. But that said, we are about to start spoilers, so if you don't want those, you should probably tune out now.
Jeffro gave his recommendation thumbs up or thumbs down. Would you like to go into more detail here?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with the easy part. The subtle, not the non-subtle, non-deep analysis part. Like, okay, you got a kid, he's lost his parents, and you got these people who are looking after him, and like the biggest thing that he faces in life is that nobody likes him. Like, he's not a likable person. He can't make any friends. At school, people call him names. He's really annoying. And then like, what's the reason why he's just a complete failure socially? It's because he's fat, right? And yet here he is. He's living with these people, and every chapter they're loading him up with cookies and hot chocolate, and then more cookies, and it's like
donuts.
It's painful. It's painful. It's like, you guys, you aren't helping him. You aren't helping this kid. Like, you have, like, you got all these magical powers at your disposal, and you can't conjure up a weightlifting set. Like, what's your problem?
Truth.
So
I genuinely Jeffro, get the impression that they knew that he was having trouble making friends. I think they assumed that when he went out, he was fine.
No. But think about this: at the end of the book, because I just finished I listened to the audiobook like a couple of weeks ago, and I just finished rereading this today. At the end of the book, what was that? Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay, so sorry, I was getting an odd sound that sounds like something a notification.
He gets the girlfriend at the end, right?
Right. Okay. At the end of the book, Jonathan says, Lewis, are you hiding something from me? Oh, nothing much, Uncle Jonathan, except that I have a new friend. What? You do? Said Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman in unison.
That's true. So they're surprised that they're either surprised that he's telling them, or they're surprised that he has one.
No, he's thwarting their plan. They're like, instead of helping him develop, character and personality and discipline and, weightlifting skills and marathon running skills and, things that make people like you, like, no, they want him to they want to like accentuate his unlikableness,
So
make
this
him
is
like completely obese.
so wait, so they are a single mom who doesn't want her little boy to go off and make friends and be independent.
Ooh, yeah, that's right.
Well, all right, hold on. Jonathan was completely fine with eclipsing the moon in order to, for the sake of impressing Tarby. And by the way, I did laugh out loud when we see Lewis's internal monologue of, "Oh, I got to come up with something impressive," and just blurting out, "My uncle can eclipse the moon." I liked that, but Jonathan was completely fine with doing it. And it seems like, as far as he was concerned, that he put on an excellent show, and that what kind of friend wouldn't like to see the moon eclipse like
But
that?
he never has time to play catch with this kid so that he cannot like suck at baseball. I mean, the humiliation of being picked last at school week after week, and you can't help this kid like suck less. It's just
Well,
awful.
it's well, and the other thing, and this, so Jeffro, if this aspect of it bothered you, do not continue to book 2 because some elements of that kind of thing get worse. I didn't really think about this much that much the first time through, but like as a kid, Lewis is having trouble making friends, and I didn't really think about it until a second time through. But he's also just not a very likable character. Like, to the reader, because like you can have a character who has problems getting along with the other people, but make it so that the reader sympathizes with him, likes him.
Right,
But
right.
Lewis isn't that either.
Like Billy from Gremlins,
Yeah, yeah.
and or that kid that was in The Last Starfighter, at the trailer park.
If you were to ask, all right, if I were to ask you right now who your favorite character was, granted that it might be a very you might be grading on a curve here, but who would you say your favorite character was?
The most well, okay. There's two kinds of answers to this. If you're talking about a book, because there's the person you find entertaining. There's a person you might find entertaining to read about, and there's a person you'd actually like, might actually want to actually know in real life. Um, the most entertaining character would probably be Jonathan,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
Lewis's uncle.
Yeah,
yeah. I
that's
agree
what
with
I would
that.
have as well. And I don't know if I would actually want to. Uh, I don't know if I would actually want to hang out with any of these people in person.
No.
Entertaining to read about or otherwise.
Well, there's this line in there where early on Lewis is just bungling around and trying to protagonize, and but then the Jonathan scolds him and is like, look, you're a Watson, you're a Dr. Watson type character, right? You don't actually do anything, right? And I was like, that would be great if the book was set up that way, but it's not. Lewis is like an anti-protagonist.
Well,
You'd almost say that he was an antagonist. He creates the problems that have to be solved, and yet somehow these two magicians just kind of pretend to let him help. And then at the very end, like he's just a failure after failure after mistake. Like he set and forth the events that they're having to like fix at the end, and he never tells them about what's going on when it would like matter. Instead, but then suddenly it's just like, oh, we're in the last chapter of the book now. We got to finish it, and it just so happens that whatever stupid stuff this dumb kid thought up is like the key to everything, and it's like, I'm sorry, but no.
Okay. So I will say, so no, I'm just like, in terms of like positives, in terms of like things I like. Okay, and I'm not saying this wins the book as a whole, but comparing it to a lot of books written since and a lot of books out today, Christianity is in the book like from the first page, and it's not like it's all about Christianity. It's not like that's him. It's just kind of the assumed background, and that used to be the way America was, and that's kind of nice.
I almost felt that way. I almost felt that way, and I wanted to say exactly what you just said, and but then then you realize, wait a minute, this is really subversive. Do you know where I'm going with this? The end of the world, according to Christianity, is a good thing. And you have two wizards and a fat kid with no friends working to prevent the end of the world. Like, even on the gravestone, it says, the trump shall sound, the dead shall be raised. It's like, yeah, that's a really awesome thing. That's something I'm very excited about. I can't wait. I can't wait.
Just because that's going to be a good thing when God does it does not mean that if two evil wizards decide to do it early, then that would still be a good thing.
No, the only evil character, the only people that like quote scripture as if it's like real and use biblical phrasings to describe things are the bad guys. This is no different than like the A-Team episode that came on when I was a kid, where the guys who looked like priests were the bad guys, or the Magnum PI episode where the person that's dressed like a nun is the bad guy. We're literally every science fiction story created around the time that this came out, where if there was religion in it, the religion was only a means of control. It's totally subversive.
Where do the bad guys quote scripture? Because Lewis was quoting scripture in the first page, as Zach Log mentioned. The dead shall be raised. The trump shall sound, and the dead shall be raised. That was not the Izzards. That was just on the entrance to the graveyard itself. And the bit I read mentioning Doomsday doesn't quote scripture at all. And I am drawing a blank. I mean, you have Lewis at one point singing "Once to Every Man and Nation" to himself, which granted isn't scripture, but it's based on a. But it's he is not presented as the bad guy. I can't think of any time in which they actually do quote scripture, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be misremembering.
Okay, all right. Well,
I will also say, in terms of like the end of the world, there is, and I was trying to look this up, and I can't find it right now because I don't have the right phrasing apparently. But
don't immanentize the eschaton.
Well, there's that, but I was trying to look up the in the actual Bible. Like, one of the minor prophets, he says like, oh, why do you say let the Lord stay, I cannot wait for the day of the Lord, or something to that effect. Like, when that comes, you're not going to be happy about it. And so there's even if it is the transition to something better, it's definitely it's not necessarily going to be a fun ride, so to speak.
No, like, okay, you got wizards that feed fat kids donut and hot chocolate every day. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry. They got to do better than once to every man and nation. They got to do better than that.
It could be worse. It could be Dumbledore, as J.K. Rowling described him outside of the books.
Oh.
Yeah, perhaps I've read too many modern books, but by comparison, these problems are light.
Okay, so I will say another positive thing, like in terms of like symbols, in terms of like overarching things throughout the book, the idea that you have this this magical clock that you can hear but not see, and you don't know where it is, and it's doing something, like that's actually like a really cool, like, MacGuffin, I guess you could say, a really cool, symbol of like, something dreadful coming.
And there's also the thing of the evil can't cross over running water, which I found, in the car chase chapter, they crossed over the bridge.
Yep, and they're safe.
And the evil couldn't follow it, and of course I immediately thought it's like, when Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings, he had planned to have the Nazgul not be able to cross water at all when he wrote that. But that particular impulse fell afoul of the fact that it would be very hard for them to travel from Mordor to the Shire without ever going over running water.
Well, I'm sure you've heard the theory about why we industrialized so fast, and that was to stop the fairies. Because in much the same way that these evil spirits can't cross running waters, fairies can't cross iron and are very weak to iron. And so if we crisscross the entire country with iron rails, put them everywhere, we limit how much the fairies can move around and get to us.
Interesting.
Let's see. So,
sorry, just
what
filling
else?
time with lesser known historical.
I might have derailed you, Zach. There, sorry.
No, we're fine.
Yes.
I will also say, like, okay, in terms of like overall story elements, you have Louis Barnevalt entering the story, a child both of whose parents died in a catastrophe. It's like, well, obviously this person is set up to be the protagonist of a fairy tale or fantasy story. Like, it's like there. If you didn't want to,
as set up as you get, yes.
If you didn't want to, I'm sorry, there's no way around it. If his name alliterated, if he was Louis Libby, then he would be a Marvel character. Yeah. But his
DC is the one with all the alliterative names. You have Clark. I mean, just Superman alone. You have Clark Kent. You have Lois Lane. You have Lex Luthor. I mean, heck, one of Superman's most recent actors was Nolan North, so they even continued it there. You have, yeah. Marvel got in on it later. Anyway,
okay, there's Peter Parker, Reed Richards, Susan
point.
Storm. Yeah. So anyway, Sean Summers, although that's alliterative by letter, not by sound, which doesn't really count. But like, okay. So now that I have given a couple of points to the plus, I will say, say the biggest thing that bothers me about this book, because there were things. Part of why I wanted to talk about this, part of why I wanted to cover this, was because there were things I liked, and there were things that bothered the heck out of me. And one of them I didn't notice as much until I read the second book, and it does the same thing. And that is Lewis. Okay. Lewis is the one who sets this, who makes a mistake and sets this whole thing going. He's he is trying to impress his friend Tarby, and so he decides he's going to do it by saying he can raise the dead, which is, even if your uncle is a wizard, that's a really weird and extreme step to think to jump to. But and he raises this.
Oh, and
go ahead.
and the uncle, he's like, when he does find out at the end, he's like, oh yeah, that's the same kind of stuff I did when I was your age.
But okay, so he does this, and they end up averting a disaster. They end up, they end up destroying the clock, stopping the evil revenant. Actually, I don't know if she's quite a revenant. The evil formerly dead. But he never actually learns a lesson.
No.
He never, because I was thinking, like, okay, to solve this, he is going to have to come to them and say, look, I did this. This is all my fault.
And he doesn't have to do that until afterwards.
Right. They resolve the problem before he has to do any of that. And it's like, no, like that's a that's a terrible narrative arc.
They could have had a scene where Jonathan is just, his head in his hands, and he's just, I don't even know what to do. This is just a complete disaster. I don't even.
How did this even happen? Why is she awake?
Yeah, exactly. And then and he's like, Uncle Jonathan, there's something I have to tell you. I would have felt a lot better about it. I mean, I felt like guilty by by identification, I'm reading this kid's exploits and I'm invested in him. I feel like, I carry some of the guilt too. And I would feel better if he had to actually apologize or something or confess. Boy, wouldn't that be like a load off your shoulders? These entire chapters goes by where he's like, I think Uncle Jonathan's on to me, but I just can't admit it. I can't admit it. It's like, it's like, wouldn't it be great if the relationship was restored? I would have enjoyed more of the book.
That Jonathan and Mrs. If he had started it off by telling them I was the one who raised Mrs. Izzard and got all this started, and if that had given Jonathan the idea of, if you did it, now I know. Now I know how to solve the problem. That would have been a lot more satisfying. I felt the same way about that. What I was hoping in the chapter where he was spying on them, and he was getting worried about getting caught, and then he manages to get out, and he wasn't caught. When I was about to turn the page, what I really hoped would happen is that he takes a moment to collect himself and realizes, it would have been better if I'd gotten caught, and goes and confesses it anyway. That would have, that whole chapter would have worked a lot better if that is the way it would have ended.
And the second book, The Figure in the Shadows, does the same kind of thing. And it's like, no, you can't. It's not like you have to, hammer the readers. This is the moral of the story. But
you can't hammer us the other way. You can't hammer us. You can't hit us over the head with the fact that he does not ever get caught, and that the situation is still resolved otherwise. Yeah,
it's when you have him start this off by his own foolishness and his own, and he knows, I'm betraying my uncle's trust. I'm not supposed to be reading these and doing this, and he does it anyway. But you never have him learn anything from that, you really broke the reader's. You subverted expectations.
Yes, you did. You absolutely did.
Congratulations, Ryan Johnson.
No, you can tell though. If you pay attention, you can tell that this is not a serious book and that these are not serious people when it comes to overseeing a young soul. Because as soon as he enters their house, what's the first thing that they do? They play games in such a way that Lewis, the loser, always just magically wins through sleight of hand. They play these games for hours and it always ends up this way. These people are so devoid of normal human feeling and emotion that they can play games for hours and cheat the whole time to force a particular outcome, and yet still think of that as playing a game. This is anathema. It's just it's consistent with the way they do everything.
I'll put I'll go for it.
Go ahead.
So there was a scene in Dr. Stone, and I don't think I'm spoiling much here. There's a scene in Dr. Stone in which a dramatic decision comes down. The characters agree they're going to play poker, and whoever wins gets to decide how it's going to be. And from the very get-go, there is no pretense that this is going to be an honest game. The question is, who can cheat more creatively? So you have people starting out with 5 of a kind and going up from there. But it was still treated just because they weren't playing according to normal rules. It was still clear that there were still rules going on. If the other person figures out how you were doing it, then you lose. But Jeffro, I still agree with you. If this is just how Jonathan and Mrs. Zimmerman played, where they were just passing the time by seeing who can use magic and sleight of hand to give themselves better cards or to screw up probability or whatever, that's fine. It's the fact that they're doing it to let Lewis win, and Lewis can't do magic, but they're not, so what could they do? They could play something else, or they could just play a normal game of poker that Lewis would have as good a chance as anybody. But they're not doing either of those things. They're just they're not going for anything.
It's an image
just
of
them playing poker this way. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
It's an image. It's a perfect picture of what the author is doing with the entire book.
Well, and okay, so I will say, like, if you have little kids and you're playing a game with them or you're playing with them, like, you might, especially, like, okay, you're a grown-up, you have a lot more knowledge and a lot more skills. You might, kind of throw the game a little bit sometimes. That seems like a normal thing to do. But you don't do it. Like, kids also have to face the reality, have to learn, and kids also have to, learn to face the reality that I'm going to lose sometimes. I'm not going to get my way every time. And if you try to paper that over, like, long-term, you're not doing the child any favors. So, like, softening... Go ahead.
The way to do this, or at least the way my dad did it, when he taught me how to play chess, he was obviously far, far better than I was. But he told me from when I was very little and just learning the rules, he told me, I am never going to go easy on you. And as far as I can tell, he never did. What he did do, however, was rig the deck in some other way. Like, if we were playing with clocks, he would give me a half hour, he would give himself 1 minute. Or he would play without his queen. Or he would give me some other explicit advantage. But then, having set that up at the beginning, he would still play as hard as he could. There are ways you can do that. There are ways you can even the odds a bit. without actually taking the genuine challenge out of life and taking away the fact that, yeah, if you're a child, you're going to have to face adversity, and you also should learn that
it's the same person who doesn't have time to play catch with a fat kid.
All right, I wonder if Lewis had asked, would Jonathan have done it?
Played catch with him, you mean?
I suspect he would have. And I suspect it is exactly like Lewis to never have asked or even thought of asking.
That does seem like a fair question to pose. Yeah. So okay. So I said one thing, and the biggest thing that bothered me, and it's also kind of funny because there were two major themes in this book that troubled me, and both of them showed up in the second book as well. And the second one is basically, women are stronger and better.
Yeah.
And actually, this is also something that is really starting to get on my nerves with the Dresden Files. Like all of the, there's a few exceptions, but like the most powerful characters you see in the Dresden Files are almost all women, and it's like,
I was about to say there are definitely exceptions, but I see the trend.
Yeah, and so in this one, Uncle Jonathan is a wizard, which is more than 99% of humanity. But the neighbor, Mrs. Zimmerman, is a stronger and better one. Oh, and also Isaac Izzard, built this, designed this clock and set this plan in motion, but he did not have the strength to get the clock to do what he needed it to do, but his crazy wife did. And then actually in the second one, you see it again because this friend Lewis makes at the end of this book, Rose Rita, this girl is better at dealing with regular physical bullies than Lewis is. And
at that age and given Lewis, that's actually believable.
Yeah, but it's like I said, it's the pattern.
Yeah.
And also Jeffro, if you did not like Uncle Jonathan in this one, again, when it gets to that part, you're really going to not like Uncle Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I think yeah. I don't think anything that's in this book is an accident. And like every single thing there, it's just too neat. And I'm glad that you're here to say that, like, no, it's not just your imagination, I mean, but like it's like no, it's all rigged to be a certain way to fit a certain narrative, and it's toxic.
So I'm kind of curious because I did not that long ago read your on the Kasalia blog your review of The Face in the Frost. So this is the same person writing the two books. What do you think? How do you count for the same person producing one thing you hate and one thing you love quite a bit?
Oh well, the gosh.
I guess unfair.
I don't. The other one was, the setup was a monk got a hold of a book that that did bad things, and then hilarity ensues. And it doesn't touch on the themes of parenting or being a kid or like what you should be doing. It just it's just one wonder after another. And you could see that talent here. This book is explicitly a part of a program to deconstruct civilization. It's literally an attack. You wonder, you got to wonder what kind of conversation he had with his editors. Like, okay, well, you can be a big successful author your whole life, but we just need you to sell out your entire civilization and culture by, creating this thing that is not so subtly a very dangerous thing for young minds to be steeped in. We want you to create this thing. We want you to create this break with tradition and help destroy your kind.
So I forget where I saw this, but
Somehow I doubt there was a conversation like that he had with his editors.
Oh no, you got. How do you think he knew to go down the line? Like, nope, nope. Oh no, confess what he did. Definitely don't do that. How do you don't think editors talk to their authors about like what they need to accomplish with the book? This thing is a tactical nuke. It's a cultural attack nuke. They knew what they were doing. If the author didn't himself come up with it, I would not be surprised at all if the editor said, no, we need a children's book series that's this subversive, but not this subversive, because that'd be too much too fast. It just needs to be subversive on these points, and we need someone who can pull it off effectively.
So I wonder if how this will affect your reading of this book, because I don't know where I saw this, but I read somewhere that when Bellairs first wrote this, he originally did not write this as a children's book, and then like an editor or someone said like either like hey, there's a really great market for this kind of thing, or else I'm looking at the way this book is arranged, and I think it would be much more interesting if you had a young protagonist, and he went back and rewrote it basically, and put Lewis in the middle of this situation. So I wonder how that affects what you think of this.
Yeah, the smoke-filled room. There was a smoke-filled room somewhere, and like, well, you can write your ticket, man. You can write your ticket. You just have to do this one job for us, man.
So in terms of like, I will say, among positive things in this book, the way they there's, I guess, 3 scenes where you kind of really see magic, someone trying hard to work magic, and I think all 3 of those, like, he's good at creating this sense of you're in a different kind of world now, because there's the scene of the where Uncle Jonathan does eclipse the moon, and for one thing, he doesn't just say a few words and wave his hand and it happens. He has to like go through this whole big setup, and then it's not just
the moon and throw it like a frisbee. Which, believe it or not, is why I think he'd be fine playing catch if Lewis asked him. Because he was fine throwing the moon around as a frisbee, just for fun.
Yeah, and then it's not just that the moon eclipses, it's that, like, suddenly, everyone in this, relatively small space is connected, can hear things, moving and growing down in the earth. And there's, dancing lights in the backyard, and like for a brief time you're in a very different kind of world, and I think on a technical level, I think Bellairs executes that kind of thing very well here. even if you think he is using this skill towards bad ends.
Yeah, I like the organ where
Oh yes,
he takes it apart and this moth comes out of there, right? And it's like yeah, I'm reading that and it's like that's stellar. That's just stellar. That you can see that whole room and like for 3 chapters after that I'm like, but the moth. The moth.
Well,
what was the moth?
Yeah, and also like he smacks it on his head and then he's like something's dripping down and he runs off screaming and I'm like I feel like something was supposed to happen with that didn't.
Yeah, okay, you too.
I like the minor detail of the organ in the front parlor during their final ritual, and the organ was getting bored and just started playing its own things.
And like the final. So
yeah, the cards where he's like, we're gonna play poker until you draw this one card.
Oh yeah, and you get
the ace of nitwits,
square root signs and question marks and all kinds. You know, it just gets weirder and weirder.
I was enchanted by all that. You know, I mean, the plot completely failed me, but I was just like, yeah, this guy, he could have done some charming things if he didn't have to submit to the program.
I would love to play poker and draw the ace of nitwits.
And okay, so yeah, like it is technically well executed in many respects, even if it is turned toward a bad end. We can say that. To Bellairs' credit. Now, one other thing that I found kind of weird, and also I definitely see parallel in our lives, and also fits into the corrupting this poor innocent child who's fallen into his grasp kind of thing. I think it's at Halloween. Uncle Jonathan puts on this illusion show, and Lewis wants to see the Spanish Armada sailing away from England, and he sees them sailing away defeated, and there's this Duke so and so, and Lewis. And he's very sad and frustrated, and that because they're losing and they're on this dangerous journey. And then his uncle is like, oh hey, do you want to fire on them? And he's like, what? No, that's terrible. And his uncle like, oh no, it's just an illusion. And immediately Lewis is like, okay, bring out the cannon, and starts like 2 minutes ago he was like, wow, I feel so sad for this poor man. And then he's like, oh, okay, I'm going to blow the hell out of him.
That didn't parse. That scene didn't parse.
Now, I will say, when I was thinking about this, I'm like, especially because I'm playing, I don't know, actually, I've talked to Hari Seldon about this a little bit. I've been playing rather too much of this video game called RimWorld lately, and I've seen numerous other games that have this kind of thing. There are lots of opportunities to like have the people you're in charge of in this game do like really horrible things, and sometimes you kind of do that just for the amusement of it, and it's like. Video game
in 1970.
Right. It's video games weren't a thing then, or
not like this.
They were, or if there were, they were not at the level where you have actual characters, and anything like moral choices. But like that does feel very familiar, and it's like and also like people playing The Sims. At some point at some point everyone who's played one of those games starts horribly tormenting their people just because it's kind of funny. And I don't know what the moral implications of torturing non-existent people for fun is.
No,
I did.
it's the emotional maturity of someone that takes bugs and put them in jars and then shakes up the jar and then looks at the jar and waits for them to fight. That's all that is, and it's like I come on, like you got that. I mean, you got that scene where all that other great stuff is happening. Like just nah. It's like
I mean, if he had just skipped to the um, if he had just skipped to Waterloo, which they did at the end, I love the detail of Jonathan just deciding to let Napoleon win for a change. If it had been that the Spanish Armada, the fact that you have this this historical event that there's inexplicably a little set of pay binoculars for. And if you went from that to the Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon ends up just winning, you could. It's fine. I don't know why he put in the firing the cannons, but actually more than that, I don't know why he put in Jonathan sort of chiding him for not firing at first. That was the weird part. He said, and I have the page. Jonathan. So this is Lewis is protesting. The poor Duke and his men. Can't we do something for them? Jonathan stared at Lewis and rubbed at his chin. You know, he said slowly, for a boy who loves to play at sieges and war, you are remarkably peaceable. When confronted with the real thing, that is. Fortunately for you, however, this isn't the real thing. It's an illusion. We're still really in Mrs. Zimmerman's dining room with the table at one end and the purple fire on the other.
right,
The Duke
right.
and his ships out there are less real than smoke and mist, and so is that cannon. Go on, have a shot. That seems like a weird thing to encourage.
No, look, when Merlin turned King Arthur into birds and mice and all the creatures that he turned him into, it was always in pursuit of of enhancing some aspect of his education and elucidation in the deeper matters. And there's no, and with Jonathan, this is just the ultimate. This is the nail in the coffin for him. There's nothing there. There's literally nothing there.
Well, and also if you were talking about the Sword in the Stone film, the animated, the
Um,
Disney,
well,
or
even in
T.H. White's.
yeah, well, even in uh, the play, the Camelot play, there's references in the dialogue to that same event. So it's not just there.
Well, and I did read the first book of, is it T.H. White? Is that the author?
The Once and Future King.
Yeah, I read the first book of that, and I stopped after that for some reason. But I don't remember whether they had those same events in the book. But like I am a little more familiar with the Disney movie. And another thing, in the Disney movie, like when Merlin transformed them, they were also still interacting with the real world. It wasn't just an illusion he could remake however he wanted it to. And so that's another in terms of like moral a moral component to the story that seems, because like when he was again in the Disney movie, like when he was a fish, there was actual danger when the larger fish was chasing them to try and eat one of them.
But think about in terms of a fairy tale, you have a wizard that loads you up on cookies and hot chocolate, that leaves all the magical books out where you can get at them, that knows you've gotten into them and never says anything to you about it, that cleans up the magical mistakes that you make and lets you think you were the key to fixing everything. Yeah. In the same way that he let you win all the games, the poker games at the beginning. It's like, at what point does Jonathan have any kind of a positive, adult parent teacher guy? The premise of my wizard teacher guardian is going to unlock all these things for me. He's going to imagine all the things that he could show me and teach me. It's like, what does Jonathan ever do for this kid?
Imagine if the scene had gone the other way. So Lewis, it mentioned that Lewis was big into reading about all these battles. If Jonathan's whole point was to show him a battle and show him, oh yeah, it's actually not all that pretty. If that had been his only point, that would have made perfect sense. Agree with him or not, it would have at least, you could see the lesson that he's trying to teach. Like, okay, when you're reading about all these numbers and, numbers of people dead and numbers of artillery and everything in the abstract, you might want to remember that there are actual people involved, and here's what it looks like. That would be one thing. And you could still work in the invitation, oh yeah, here's a cannon, want to shoot at him? To sort of test him out and to show Lewis, oh no, I don't really. It was weird that he didn't use it to teach a lesson.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine. Do you really think that when John Bellairs pulls his punches like this, do you really think it just so happened to come out this way? I think he's a talented enough author that he knew precisely what was happening with these scenes, and they very consistently reinforce a certain ethos, a certain oeuvre. It's not an accident. It's all intentional, and the fact that it's intentional makes it worse. If he was a bad
I've never
author,
read anything else by John Bellairs. That I can't say.
I've read this book and the sequel, The Figure in the Shadows, and I also a few years ago, and I don't remember it super clearly, but I read The Face in the Frost, which the biggest impression I have of that one that remains is that is the biggest case of mood whiplash I can remember. Especially for a relatively short book. Like I never had that one on paper, but it can't be much larger than this. Because like it starts out and it's these two medieval wizards, and it actually is reminds me a little bit of Merlin in that Disney cartoon. Like they're
the anachronism.
There's anachronisms. It's also kind of goofy and lighthearted, and then like by halfway through the book, like there's absolutely like mind-wrenching horror scenes, and you're like,
how did we get here?
What? Which is this the same? Did I switch books somewhere? Like. He goes into this inn, and like he goes to his bed, and then like in the middle of the night, like there's this woman, like I don't remember the details, but like there's this woman standing at his window, and and she turns around and she doesn't have a face, and then like the whole inn and then the whole town he's in like dissolves around him. And it's like, what the? Yeah, it's the biggest case of mood whiplash I've ever seen. Now, go ahead.
I keep thinking of little details that I liked about the book. I was looking again at the Battle of Waterloo, and there was a detail I missed the first time. In Lewis's books, the artillery and the various types of artillery were represented by various shapes. And Jonathan, for whatever reason, decided to actually reenact that. And so you have blue arrows crashing into red squares and turning them into trapezoids and rhombuses. And you have Napoleon's artillery answering him with all kinds of other similar geometric colors. And I could see, if you're a little kid reading one of these books, I could see you imagining that, you know? And I like, if there had been a point to this, it would have been a fantastic little detail to throw in to sort of make it think that that's something, remind you of the kind of daydreams you have. But there wasn't a point to the scene. That's what made it so weird.
The moth.
Okay.
The moth. The moth.
Okay. So, we've spent about an hour on this, and the audiobook is only like 3 hours long, something like that. So,
all right. Have you listened to the hundreds of hours spent on The Last Jedi on YouTube?
Oh.
I think Mahler's critique alone was 3 times longer than the movie itself. We're fine.
Okay. Let me see. So I have one. I had a short little set of notes here. I guess I have 2 more. From my notes. One thing that I thought was kind of an interesting idea, and also again the way he actually plays it out is pretty fun. And it's like, okay, our enemies are methodical and organized and detailed, so we have to fight them by being silly and random. And like that, actually, it's kind of funny, and it's kind of and the way he actually plays it out, the way he actually carries through the scene with the card game slowly becoming more, the poker game slowly becoming more and more bizarre, and the player organ deciding it's playing its own tunes, and
then the 8-ball,
the magic
giving
8-ball.
an answer. Not only giving an answer, but when they don't understand it, reshaking itself to say, no, this is what I mean, you idiots.
Doesn't it apologize? It says Culp. Here, let me see.
It might. Let's see. Yes, yeah, yes, no, maybe. Then it says Culpit, and they have no idea what it means. Suddenly the ball hiccups. Jonathan glanced quickly down at it and saw the little window was filled with bubbles. Oh, good grief, look at this, Florence. Now it thinks it's a Bendix watcher. Should we get out the Ouija board? And then it finally says, the bubbles finally popped, and now the sign says Cole Bin, which is much more clear. It doesn't apologize, but it ought to.
It's well, and so yeah, the way that whole scene plays out, that's really fun. It's also a point for and against Lewis as a character. He decides he's going to go and confront Selena Izzard, in her house, by himself, which is especially as compared with his character so far, this is a brave thing.
Anything's more reasonable than telling your wizard uncle what you did.
I was going to say. This would have been super brave thing to do if it hadn't been a result of cowardice for not wanting to tell your uncle and Mrs. Zimmerman to do it. It would have, if they'd already been frozen or something, if they weren't there, if they couldn't be reached, then it's a super brave thing to do. But if you're doing it to try to cover up the fact that you raised the dead without permission, no, it's not brave. It's it's you creeping around trying to hide your mistakes.
Well, and it's also very stupid, and also you basically see his plan is he wants Uncle Jonathan's magic staff to do all the actual work for him. And it's like that's no. And so like he has both.
I wouldn't hold the fact the plan is stupid, which it is. I wouldn't hold that against him if that was the only thing wrong with it.
Yeah, and it's the other thing I have here, and I know I've touched on this in other conversations on my channel. I don't know if with either of you. The book is like the in the last third of the book you find out they're trying to save the world. And then it comes back to the thing for me is, and I like I said, I think I've said this other conversation on this channel. No one actually cares that much about the world.
Yeah.
Because the world, doesn't actually exist to most of us. What we care about is the things is our town, our family, and the things we actually see and interact with.
Jonathan explicitly eclipsed the moon just for the local, like his house and maybe the next house over. He wasn't sure. He wasn't sure that if he even eclipsed the moon from a nearby town, although he said that was interesting. He certainly knows that he didn't eclipse it for the whole world. And yet, he still thought that eclipsing the moon was something very much worth doing. If it had threatened, let's say that the family that had been living in the Izzard's old house were still there, and they were the only ones threatened by Mr. and Mrs. Izzard coming back, or at least the only ones immediately threatened, Jonathan could easily have brought back the lunar eclipse as a lesson and say, we still have to risk ourselves. We still have to do everything possible, even if it's just this one house.
Yeah, and also, you could have had that family, be a previous part of the story and have them be people that you as the reader care about. And I do think it's a mistake, I think, is becoming more and more common for writers, thinking that if you make the stakes bigger just in terms of like physical scale and consequences, you make the story better. And it's like, no. And there's actually a poem by G.K. Chesterton, which he makes this point in just an absolutely painful way, and he's talking about English. I'm guessing from context that it was about World War I, and the poem is "The English Graves." And he says, of these English soldiers who died fighting this war, how small a crumpled laurel leaves lies crumpled here. How small a withered laurel leaf.
Oh, you have it.
How small a shriveled laurel leaf lies crumpled here and curled. They died to save their country, and they only saved the world. And it's like, yeah, and you look at history since then, and it's like, yeah, they did not.
Have you ever read his poem to Hilaire Belloc? Just speaking of Chesterton, I think it relates.
I'm not. Do you know the title?
It's called To Hilaire Belloc.
Huh. I don't think it was in any of the ones I have read through. Although I have this collection right here. This is one of the ones in my background.
Yeah, it's probably in there somewhere.
Well, this is also Collected Poetry Part 1, and so
well,
I don't know how many parts there are of the poetry, and I I think this is the only one of those I have. I have other volumes from this series, but this is the only. Let's see. Let me see. Do I have it? Two. It does not appear to be in here.
So the opening of that started out in a way I really liked. For every tiny town or place God made the stars especially. Babies look up with owlish face and see them tangled in a tree. You saw a moon from Sussex down, a Sussex moon, untraveled still. I saw a moon that was the town's, the largest lamp on Camden Hill. And the whole point of that was that Chesterton could see the whole sky, and it still felt like home.
Yeah, it's like when Wendell Berry said, some place is better than any place.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Well, I will say the thing I sent Zachlog when I was one page into the book, where he recites part of the Psalms that are recited at the start of Mass, and he mentions "Quare tristis es anima mea, quare conturbas me." A lot of people, and I was guilty of this too as an altar server, a lot of people forget that that's supposed to be a question. That's something that you're asking rather than just a statement that you're saying. And Lewis actually remembered it, or at the very least, the author did. So I liked that. I was I was sad that that didn't really come up much in the rest of the book.
Okay, well, as far as this book goes, I think I've said most of the things I wanted to say, and I will say, the things that bothered me about this one, I mentioned the two of them, and they only really started like they kind of got to me, and then I read the second book, and both of them were there again, and I'm like, no, this is what's going on. And so it's actually kind of makes me curious now, because if I have it correct, there were 3 books with Louis Barnevalt written by John Bellairs, and then at least one other person picked up and continued with the same characters later, and it makes me wonder whether the other person's books were better or worse than these. And it's also the interesting thing of seeing something skillfully executed. If you accept Jeffro's interpretation, and I'm not saying not, I'm just saying you don't have to. But if you accept Jeffro's interpretation that that the narrative problems here are intentional, it is also interesting seeing something skillfully executed towards a bad end.
Yeah, but that's why. Yeah, I'm gonna say no. You can't. It comes down to the definitions of good and bad. Skillfully bad. I mean, that's the meme of the guy that's like goofing around and everybody's like,
jokes on them. I was only pretending.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I would disagree with you there, because it's definitely possible to be skillful in one area and use it for a bad end. And we've seen it because a lot of modern films they don't have either. And a lot of modern writing, we see it's not skillfully executed, and also it's a bad end. We know that these two things can be separate.
Right, but that doesn't make it a bad thing done well is still bad. There's really no reason to settle for that. So, at all.
I'll have to the next time. I'll have to see if I can find something you like for the next time we talk, Jeffro. Because I don't want this to be your only impression of the talks going forward.
Maybe I should save my recommendation for later then.
Okay. Well, I think I've said most of the things I want to say about this book. I guess, Jeffro, you started. So, would you like to? Do you have any last thoughts that you wanted to put in here?
No, that this is reading this book. It's a rare case of where time would have been better spent playing games from 1980 and the late 70s.
And Hari Seldon, how about you? Any last thoughts you wanted to put in on The House with the Clock in Its Walls?
Sorry, I was too busy looking for the ace of nitwits in my cards. I'll have to get back to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you both for joining me tonight, and God be with you.
Have a good night.
Adios.